The blood on her torn dress caught Thomas Everett's eye first, stark against the dusty brown fabric as she stumbled through the mesquite brush toward his ranch house in the Arizona Territory summer of 1878. Thomas had been mending a section of fence near the creek when he spotted her, a young Apache woman whose dark hair hung loose and tangled around her shoulders, her face pale despite her bronze skin. He dropped his tools and ran toward her, his heart pounding not from exertion but from sudden concern. Living alone on his ranch 15 miles outside of Tucson meant he rarely saw anyone, let alone someone who appeared to be in such distress. She collapsed before he reached her, falling to her knees in the red dirt. Thomas slowed his approach, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. He had lived in Arizona long enough to know that trust between white settlers and the Apache people had been shattered by years of violence and broken promises. The Apache wars had left deep wounds on both sides, and Thomas wanted no part in adding to that pain. "I will not hurt you," he said clearly, keeping his voice steady and low. "You are safe here." The woman looked up at him with eyes that held both fear and determination. She tried to speak, but her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. Thomas noticed the blood on her dress seemed to be from scrapes and cuts rather than a serious wound, but she was clearly exhausted and possibly injured in ways he could not yet see. "Let me help you to the house," Thomas said, moving closer slowly. "I have water and food." She did not protest when he carefully helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they made their way to his simple ranch house. The structure was modest but well built, with thick adobe walls that kept the interior cool even in the brutal Arizona heat. Thomas guided her to a chair at his wooden table and immediately fetched a cup of water from the clay pitcher he kept covered with a damp cloth. She drank slowly at first, then more eagerly as her body remembered its desperate thirst. Thomas refilled the cup twice before she finally pushed it away, her breathing still labored but more regular. He dampened a clean cloth and offered it to her so she could wipe her face and hands. "My name is Thomas Everett," he said, pulling another chair away from the table to give her space. "This is my ranch. You are welcome to stay as long as you need." The woman studied him with intelligent dark eyes, assessing whether his words matched his intentions. Thomas was 24 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work, with brown hair that was too long and a beard he kept meaning to trim. He had come to Arizona 3 years ago after his parents died of fever back in Missouri, seeking a fresh start where memories would not haunt him at every turn. The solitude of ranch life suited his quiet nature, though lately the loneliness had begun to weigh on him more heavily. "Rosa," the woman finally said, her voice rough from thirst and exhaustion. "My name is Rosa Lightfoot." Thomas felt relief at hearing her speak English, though he tried not to show his surprise. Many Apache people spoke multiple languages out of necessity, having been forced to adapt to the encroaching American settlement of their ancestral lands. "Rosa," Thomas repeated with a respectful nod. "What happened to you? Are you hurt beyond these cuts?" Rosa looked down at her torn dress and dirty hands. "I was gathering herbs in the hills when white men came. Hunters, I think. They saw me and chased me. I ran for many hours. I do not know where my people are from here." Thomas felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of men hunting another person like an animal. "You are safe now," he said firmly. "No one will harm you while you are on my land. I give you my word." "Your word?" Rosa asked, and he heard the skepticism in her voice. He could not blame her for doubting the promises of a white man. "I know words are cheap," Thomas said quietly, "but I mean what I say. I have no quarrel with you or your people. This land belonged to the Apache long before any of us came here. I am just trying to live my life and harm no one." Rosa studied him again with that penetrating gaze. "You live alone?" "Yes," Thomas admitted. "For 3 years now, I raise cattle and horses, sell them in Tucson when I need supplies. It is a simple life, but it is mine." "Lonely," Rosa observed, and Thomas could not tell if it was a question or a statement. "Sometimes," he agreed, "but I prefer solitude to bad company." A ghost of a smile crossed Rosa's face, there and gone so quickly Thomas almost missed it. "That is wise." Thomas stood and moved to the small kitchen area. "You should eat something. I have beans and cornbread from this morning. It is not much, but it will help restore your strength." "You are kind," Rosa said, and he heard surprise in her voice, as though kindness from a white rancher was not something she had expected to encounter. He served her food on a tin plate, and she ate slowly, clearly famished but forcing herself to take small bites. Thomas sat across from her, sipping coffee and trying not to stare. She was beautiful, he realized, though that observation felt inappropriate given her circumstances. Rosa appeared to be close to his own age, perhaps 21 or 22, with high cheekbones and an elegant bearing that exhaustion and fear could not entirely diminish. "The cuts on your arms need cleaning," Thomas said when she finished eating. "I have medical supplies if you will allow me to help, or I can bring them to you and give you privacy." Rosa considered this. "You may help. I cannot reach all of them properly." Thomas retrieved his medical kit, a wooden box his mother had given him before he left Missouri. Inside were bandages, a bottle of whiskey for disinfecting wounds, needle and thread for stitches if needed, and various other supplies. He brought a basin of clean water and more cloth, setting everything on the table beside Rosa. "This will sting," he warned as he dampened a cloth with whiskey and began gently cleaning the cuts on her forearms. Rosa did not flinch, though he saw her jaw tighten against the pain. The cuts were numerous but not deep, the result of running through brush and thorny plants in her desperate flight. As Thomas worked, he became acutely aware of how close they were, of the warmth of her skin under his careful touch. He had not been this near to another person in months, and certainly never to a woman who affected him the way Rosa did. There was something about her combination of strength and vulnerability that called to something deep in his chest, a protective instinct mixed with genuine admiration for her courage. "Why do you live alone?" Rosa asked, breaking the silence. "You have no wife." "No wife," Thomas confirmed, moving to clean a cut on her shoulder. "I was engaged once back in Missouri, but she decided she did not want a life out west. She married a banker instead." "She was foolish," Rosa said bluntly. Thomas laughed, surprised by both her words and his own reaction. "Maybe. Or maybe she was smart to choose comfort over uncertainty." "Comfort is not the same as happiness," Rosa countered. "My people know this well. We could accept reservation life, have the comfort of knowing where our next meal comes from, but we would lose ourselves. Some things matter more than comfort." "That is a hard truth," Thomas said, finishing with the last of her cuts. "But I think you are right." He bandaged the worst of the scrapes, his movements gentle and practiced. Rosa watched him work with an expression he could not quite read, something between curiosity and guarded appreciation. "You should rest," Thomas said when he finished. "You can take my bed. I will sleep out here." "I cannot take your bed," Rosa protested. "You can and you will," Thomas said firmly. "You have been through an ordeal. You need proper rest to recover your strength." Rosa opened her mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "Thank you, Thomas Everett." "Just Thomas is fine," he said, offering a small smile. "Come, I will show you." His bedroom was as simple as the rest of the house, containing just a bed with a corn husk mattress, a chest for his clothes, and a small table with a lamp. Thomas pulled back the worn quilt his mother had made and gestured for Rosa to lie down. "I will be just outside if you need anything," he said. "Do not hesitate to call for me." Rosa sat on the edge of the bed, touching the quilt with careful fingers. "This is beautiful work." "My mother made it," Thomas said, feeling the familiar pang of loss. "She was talented with her hands." "She is gone," Rosa asked gently. 3 years ago, fever took both my parents within a week of each other." "I am sorry," Rosa said, and her empathy sounded genuine. "It is hard to lose those we love." Thomas nodded, unable to trust his voice for a moment. "Rest now," he finally managed. "We can talk more when you wake." He stepped out and closed the door softly behind him, leaning against it for a moment as he tried to process the unexpected turn his day had taken. This morning he had woken alone as always, had coffee and cornbread, and went out to work on the fence. Now he had a beautiful Apache woman sleeping in his bed, a woman who stirred feelings in him he had thought long buried. Thomas shook his head at his own foolishness. Rosa was a guest in need of help, nothing more. She would rest, regain her strength, and then he would help her find her way back to her people. That was the right thing to do, the only thing to do. He could not afford to let his lonely heart read more into this situation than existed. He busied himself with chores around the ranch, checking on his small herd of cattle and the horses in the corral. His mare, a bay named Copper, nickered in greeting, and Thomas spent some time brushing her coat and talking to her quietly. Animals had been his primary company for 3 years, and while he loved them, they were poor substitutes for human conversation. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Thomas heard the bedroom door open. He turned from where he was splitting firewood to see Rosa standing in the doorway, looking more rested though still obviously weary. "Did you sleep?" Thomas asked, setting down the axe. "Yes," Rosa said. "Thank you, I feel stronger now." "Good," Thomas said. "Are you hungry?" "I can make something for supper." "I can help," Rosa offered, stepping out into the yard. She had washed her face and hands and had braided her long, dark hair in a single plait down her back. The torn and blood-stained dress looked worse in the better light, and Thomas realized he should find her something else to wear. "I am afraid I do not have women's clothing," Thomas said, feeling awkward. "But I have an extra shirt and pants that might fit if you roll up the sleeves and legs. They would be more comfortable than your torn dress." Rosa looked down at herself and nodded. "That would be welcome." Thomas went inside and found his spare clothes, which were clean if worn. Rosa took them with quiet thanks and returned to the bedroom to change. When she emerged wearing his oversized shirt and pants, Thomas felt his breath catch despite himself. She looked different this way, less formal perhaps, but no less beautiful. The clothes hung loose on her smaller frame, but she had managed to tuck and roll them in a way that made them functional. "Better?" Thomas asked. "Much better," Rosa confirmed. "Now I can truly help with supper without worrying about tripping on torn fabric." They worked together to prepare a simple meal of fried salt pork, beans, and the last of the cornbread. Thomas found himself acutely aware of Rosa's presence in his kitchen. The way she moved with efficient grace, the soft sound of her humming as she stirred the beans. It felt strange to have another person in his space after so long alone, but it was not an unpleasant strangeness. If anything, it felt right in a way that made him nervous. They ate at the table as the last light faded from the sky, the lamp casting warm shadows around the room. Thomas wanted to ask Rosa more about her life, her people, where she had been heading when the hunters spotted her, but he was not sure how to broach such topics without seeming intrusive. Rosa solved his dilemma by speaking first. "You said you raise cattle and horses. How many?" 20 head of cattle," Thomas said. "And 6 horses, including Copper, my riding mare. It is not a large operation, but it provides what I need. I sell a few animals each year in Tucson, and that gives me enough money for supplies and taxes." "You do all the work yourself?" "I do," Thomas confirmed. "I had a hired hand for the first year, but he moved on to seek gold in California. I found I preferred managing alone, less complicated that way." "Or more lonely," Rosa said, echoing her earlier observation. Thomas met her eyes across the table. "Perhaps both." "My people are rarely alone," Rosa said thoughtfully. "We live in groups, many families together. There is always talking, always activity. Sometimes I would walk into the hills just to find silence." "And that is what you were doing when the hunters found you?" Thomas asked. Rosa nodded. "I am a healer. I was gathering herbs that grow in the high places. I was not far from our camp, but the men chased me so far I became lost. I ran toward the sun, knowing that would take me west. Then I saw your ranch house, and I hoped you might be a kind man." She paused, then added quietly, "I was very fortunate you are." "Any decent person would have helped you," Thomas said. "You would think so," Rosa replied, and her tone carried the weight of experiences that suggested otherwise. "But that has not always been true." Thomas felt anger again on her behalf, and frustration at the cruelty and prejudice that made her statement a fact rather than an exception. "I am sorry you have had reason to doubt the kindness of strangers. Do not apologize for the actions of others," Rosa said. "You are responsible only for yourself, and yourself has been very good to me." They finished eating and cleaned up together, falling into an easy rhythm that felt comfortable despite having known each other for less than a day. Thomas found himself watching Rosa as she worked, noting the graceful economy of her movements, the way lamplight caught in her dark hair, the subtle strength in her hands. He was attracted to her, he admitted to himself. Powerfully attracted in a way that went beyond mere physical appreciation. There was something about Rosa that resonated with him on a deeper level, a sense of recognition he could not quite explain. "You should take the bed again tonight," Thomas said as they finished. "Tomorrow I will help you get your bearings and we can figure out how to find your people." "You are too generous with your bed," Rosa protested. "I can sleep on the floor with blankets. You have done enough already." "The bed is more comfortable and you are still recovering," Thomas argued. "Please, Rosa, let me do this small thing." Rosa studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. But tomorrow night we find another arrangement or I will feel too guilty to sleep at all." Thomas smiled at her stubborn insistence on fairness. "Agreed." He walked her to the bedroom door, very aware of how close they stood in the narrow hallway. Rosa looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting lamplight, and Thomas felt pulled toward her like iron to a lodestone. For a suspended moment he thought she might feel the same pull, but then she stepped back and the connection broke. "Good night, Thomas," Rosa said softly. "Good night, Rosa," he replied, and closed the door between them. Thomas lay on the floor of the main room, wrapped in blankets that smelled of dust and horse and solitude. Sleep came slowly as his mind churned through the day's events and their implications. He had offered to help Rosa find her people tomorrow, and he would keep that promise. But a selfish part of him dreaded the moment when she would leave, when his house would return to its usual empty silence. In less than a day, Rosa had reminded him what it felt like to have company, conversation, and connection. He had forgotten how much he missed those things, or perhaps he had deliberately not let himself remember because the missing hurt too much. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the summer sun already fierce by the time Thomas woke. He made coffee and was starting breakfast when Rosa emerged from the bedroom looking rested and determined. "We should go soon," she said without preamble. "My people will be worried." If I have been gone 2 days without word, they may think I am dead or captured." "Then we will leave after breakfast," Thomas agreed, though his heart sank at her eagerness to depart. "Do you remember the direction you came from?" Rosa nodded. "East and north." "I ran for most of a day, but I was exhausted and probably did not cover as much distance as it felt. If we ride, we might find the area where I was gathering herbs. From there, I will know the way." They ate quickly and Thomas saddled Copper and his second-best horse, a sturdy gelding named Dusty. Rosa swung into the saddle with practiced ease that spoke to a lifetime of riding, and they set out as the sun climbed higher. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and scrub brush and distant mountains shimmering in the heat. Thomas led the way at first, but Rosa soon took over, her sense of direction proving accurate as she guided them into increasingly rough terrain. They rode for several hours, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and drink from the canteens Thomas had brought. As they traveled, Rosa told him more about her people, about the struggle to maintain their way of life in the face of relentless American expansion. She spoke of the reservation system that confined many Apache bands to small parcels of land, of the warriors who fought to resist, of the delicate balance between survival and surrender. "My band has tried to stay away from the conflicts," Rosa explained as they paused in the shade of a large boulder. "We want only to live as we always have, to follow the seasons and hunt and gather in our traditional places. But it becomes harder each year. More settlers come, more soldiers, more restrictions." "I do not know what to say," Thomas admitted. "The injustice of it is clear to anyone with eyes to see, but I am just one man. I cannot change the way things are." "No one person can change everything," Rosa agreed. "But each person who chooses kindness over cruelty, who sees us as human rather than as obstacles to be removed, that person makes a difference." "You make a difference, Thomas." Her words settled into his chest like warmth, like the opposite of the loneliness he had carried for so long. He wanted to tell her what her presence had meant to him, how she had awakened something in him he thought might have died with his parents, but the words seemed too big and too forward for a friendship barely a day old. They rode on, and as afternoon approached, Rosa suddenly pulled her horse to a stop. "There," she said, pointing to a distinctive rock formation. "I remember that shape. I was near there when the hunters appeared." Thomas followed her gaze and felt a chill of worry despite the heat. If they were close to where the hunters had been, those men might still be in the area. He loosened his rifle in its saddle holster, wanting to be prepared if trouble found them. Rosa noticed the gesture and gave him an approving look. "You are careful. That is good." They approached the rock formation cautiously, and Rosa slipped from her horse to examine the ground. She moved in widening circles, reading signs in the dust that Thomas could not decipher. Finally, she nodded and pointed southwest. "My people's camp is that direction, perhaps 3 hours on foot." Less than 1 hour riding. Relief and regret warred in Thomas's chest. He was glad Rosa would soon be safely returned to her people, but the thought of saying goodbye left him hollow. Still, he forced a smile and gestured for her to lead the way. The terrain grew rockier as they traveled southwest, the path winding through narrow canyons and across stretches of exposed stone. Rosa navigated with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with this land, never hesitating at intersections or doubling back to correct her course. Thomas followed, impressed by her skill and trying to memorize details in case he ever needed to find this place again. He was not sure why he felt that need, but the impulse was strong. They crested a small rise, and Rosa suddenly raised her hand for him to stop. Below, in a sheltered valley, Thomas could see several traditional Apache dwellings, the dome-shaped wickiups made of wooden frames covered with brush and hide. Smoke rose from cooking fires and people moved between the structures, going about the business of daily life. Thomas counted perhaps 20 wickiups, suggesting a band of maybe 60 to 80 people. "Wait here," Rosa said quietly. "I will go ahead and explain what happened. It is better they see me first and know I am safe before they see you." Thomas understood her caution. A white man riding into an Apache camp unannounced could cause alarm or worse. He dismounted and stood with the horses as Rosa descended the slope on foot, breaking into a run as she neared the camp. He watched as people noticed her and rushed forward, saw what looked like joyful reunions and urgent conversations. He waited, trying not to feel anxious about what might happen next. Would Rosa simply stay with her people, their brief time together finished? Would someone come to thank him for helping her? Or would they view his presence with suspicion despite his good intentions? After perhaps 20 minutes, Thomas saw a group of people ascending the slope toward him. Rosa was among them, along with 3 men and 2 women. As they drew closer, Thomas noted that the men were armed but held their weapons in a non-threatening manner. The oldest of the men, who appeared to be in his 50s with gray streaking his long hair, seemed to be the leader. Rosa reached Thomas first and gave him a reassuring smile. "Thomas, these are some of the elders and leaders of my band. This is Nasha, our chief," she indicated the older man. "And these are his advisors and my parents." Thomas's eyes widened slightly at the mention of parents, and he looked at the older couple with new interest. Rosa's father was a serious-looking man in his 40s, powerfully built and carrying himself with dignity. Her mother was small and elegant with kind eyes, and the same high cheekbones Rosa possessed. "I am honored to meet you," Thomas said respectfully, looking at each person in turn. "Rosa came to my ranch in need of help, and I am glad I could provide it. She is brave and strong, and it has been my privilege to know her." Nasha studied Thomas with sharp, assessing eyes. Then he spoke, his English clear though accented. "Rosa has told us what you did for her, how you protected her and asked nothing in return. This is not common among your people. We are grateful." "Any decent person would have done the same," Thomas said, echoing his words to Rosa. "Yet many do not," Rosa's father said, speaking for the first time. His voice was deep and carried an edge of warranted bitterness. "My daughter could have been killed or worse by the hunters who chased her. Instead, she found you. We are in your debt, Thomas Everett." Thomas shook his head. "There is no debt. I only did what was right." Rosa's mother stepped forward and surprised Thomas by taking his hand in both of hers. "You have a good heart," she said simply. "Thank you for keeping our daughter safe." "It was my honor," Thomas said, meaning it absolutely. There was a brief consultation among the Apache group in their own language, rapid speech that Thomas could not follow. Rosa joined the conversation, gesturing occasionally toward Thomas. He stood patiently, holding the horses and trying not to look as nervous as he felt. Finally, Nasha turned back to him. "You will come to our camp," he said, and while it was phrased as a statement rather than a question, Thomas understood it as an invitation. "We wish to show proper gratitude. You will eat with us and be welcome as a friend." Thomas glanced at Rosa, who nodded encouragingly. "I would be honored," he said. They descended to the camp together, and Thomas was very aware of the attention they drew. Children ran alongside, curious about the white stranger, while adults watched with expressions ranging from welcome to wariness. Thomas could not blame anyone for being cautious. Relations between settlers and the Apache had been marked by violence and betrayal on both sides. Trust was a rare commodity, hard-earned and easily lost. Rosa stayed close to Thomas, occasionally saying something to people they passed. He got the sense she was explaining his role in her return, smoothing the way for his acceptance. Her presence beside him felt natural, like they had known each other far longer than 2 days. They were led to a large central area where the cooking fires burned, and the band clearly gathered for communal activities. Women were preparing food, and Rosa's mother immediately joined them, speaking rapidly and gesturing for additional preparations. Nasha indicated Thomas should sit on a blanket that had been spread on the ground, and the chief settled beside him with Rosa's father on his other side. Rosa sat near Thomas, their shoulders almost touching. "You live on your ranch alone?" Nasha asked as others gathered around. "Yes," Thomas confirmed, "for 3 years now. Before that I lived in Missouri with my parents, but they passed away. No wife, no children." Rosa's father asked, his expression suggesting this was an important question. "No," Thomas said. "I was engaged once, but she chose another path. I have been alone since coming to Arizona." "That is not good," Rosa's mother said from where she worked over the fire. "A man should not be alone. It is not natural." Thomas felt his face heat with embarrassment, but he tried to answer gracefully. "I have not found the right woman, I suppose, or perhaps she has not found me." Several people laughed at this, and the atmosphere grew more relaxed. Food was brought, a delicious stew thick with meat and wild vegetables that Thomas did not recognize but thoroughly enjoyed. Fresh bread was passed around, and someone produced a water bag with what turned out to be a mildly fermented drink that tasted of berries and honey. As they ate, people asked Thomas questions about his ranch, his life, his family. He answered honestly, finding that the interest seemed genuine rather than interrogative. In turn, he asked respectful questions about their lives, their traditions, the herbs Rosa had been gathering when she was chased. The conversation flowed naturally, and Thomas felt himself relaxing into the communal warmth of the gathering. He noticed Rosa watching him with an expression he could not quite read, something between approval and speculation. When their eyes met, she smiled, and Thomas felt that pull again, that magnetic draw toward her that seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker the more time they spent together. As the meal concluded and people began to drift away to evening tasks, Nasha leaned toward Thomas with a serious expression. "You should know that the men who chased Rosa are not the only threat in this region. There have been soldiers from Fort Lowell asking questions about our band, about our movements. They say all Apache must go to the San Carlos Reservation. We do not wish to go there. The land is bad and many have died from sickness and hunger." Thomas nodded, having heard stories about the terrible conditions on the San Carlos Reservation in eastern Arizona. The government had created it as a place to concentrate various Apache bands, but it was a harsh environment and poorly administered. Many saw it as little better than a prison. "I understand," Thomas said. "What will you do?" "We will stay in these hills as long as we can," Nasha said. "We try to avoid conflict, to live quietly and harm no one, but I fear the day is coming when we will have no choice but to fight or to submit to reservation life. Neither choice is good." Thomas felt the weight of the chief's worry and wished he had some solution to offer. But he was just one rancher with no power or influence beyond his own small property. Still, he felt compelled to say, "If there is anything I can do to help, you need only ask. My ranch would be safe ground if any of your people needed shelter temporarily. The soldiers do not come to my land without cause." Nasha's eyes widened slightly, and Thomas heard Rosa draw in a sharp breath beside him. He realized he had just made a very serious offer, one that could put him at odds with the army if discovered. But looking at these people who had welcomed him, despite having every reason to be suspicious, who faced an impossible choice between freedom and survival, he could not regret his words. That is a generous and dangerous offer, Nasha said quietly. Why would you take such a risk for people you do not know? Thomas thought carefully about his answer. Because it is wrong what is being done to your people. This is your land, your home. You have the right to live here in peace. I cannot change the government's policies, but I can choose to act with honor rather than fear. Rosa showed me kindness by trusting me when she was vulnerable. This is my way of showing the same trust. Rosa's father leaned forward. You are either very brave or very foolish, Thomas Everett. Perhaps both. But I think my daughter chose well when she sought help at your ranch. I chose well, Rosa interjected, her tone arch. I was fleeing for my life, Father. I did not have many options. The spirits guide us even in desperate moments, her mother called from across the fire. You found a good man. That is not accident. Thomas felt his face heating again, and Rosa looked equally flustered by her mother's pronouncement. But there was something in the way Rosa's parents and the other elders looked between them that made Thomas wonder if they saw something he had barely admitted to himself. As evening deepened into night, the camp settled into quieter activities. Some people sang or told stories, others worked on various tasks by firelight. Nasha invited Thomas to stay the night rather than attempt the journey back to his ranch in darkness, and Thomas gratefully accepted. Rosa showed him to a guest wickiup, a small shelter kept ready for visitors. I hope today was not too overwhelming, Rosa said as they stood outside the structure. My people can be very direct in their interest. They were welcoming and kind, Thomas said honestly. I am grateful they allowed me into their camp. I know trust does not come easily. You made a serious offer to Nasha, Rosa said, her voice quiet so others would not overhear. Do you understand what you have promised? I think so, Thomas said. And I meant it, Rosa. If your people need help, I want to provide it if I can. Rosa looked up at him, the firelight casting warm shadows across her face. Why? You could stay safely separate from all of this, live your life and not be involved in the troubles of the Apache. Because knowing you has reminded me that safety without purpose is just a slow death, Thomas said, surprised by his own honesty. I have been alone and safe for 3 years, Rosa, but I have not been truly alive. These last 2 days, helping you, meeting your people, having a reason to act with courage instead of just surviving, it has woken something in me I thought was gone forever. Rosa's eyes glistened in the firelight, and she reached out to touch his arm gently. You are a remarkable man, Thomas Everett. I am just trying to be a good one, Thomas replied softly. They stood close in the warm darkness, the sounds of the camp settling for the night around them. Thomas wanted to say more, to tell Rosa that she was the true catalyst for this feeling of awakening, that her strength and grace and kindness had affected him in ways that went far beyond mere gratitude. But the words seemed too large and too soon, so he kept them locked in his chest where they burned like banked coals. Good night, Rosa, he said instead. Good night, Thomas, she replied, her hand lingering on his arm for just a moment longer before she stepped away and disappeared into the darkness toward her family's wickiup. Thomas entered the guest shelter and lay down on the woven mats that had been prepared for him. Sleep came slowly as his mind replayed every conversation, every look, every touch. He was falling in love with Rosa, he realized, perhaps had already fallen. It was too fast, too improbable, too complicated, and yet it felt as inevitable as the sunrise, as natural as breathing. The question was whether Rosa felt anything similar, or if he was simply a kind stranger who had helped her in a moment of need. Tomorrow he would return to his ranch, and likely weeks or months would pass before he saw her again, if he saw her at all. The thought left him aching with loss for something he had barely tasted. But Thomas was not entirely without hope. He had seen something in Rosa's eyes, felt something in the way she lingered near him, heard something in her voice when she called him remarkable. It might be wishful thinking born of loneliness and attraction, or it might be the beginning of something real and rare. Time would tell, Thomas thought as he finally drifted toward sleep. And if the spirits truly did guide people as Rosa's mother believed, perhaps time would be kinder than he dared to hope. Morning came with the sounds of the camp stirring to life. Thomas emerged from the guest wickiup to find preparations already underway for the day's activities. A woman he had not met the night before brought him bread and coffee, which he accepted with grateful thanks. He ate standing, watching the efficient choreography of the camp as people moved between tasks. Rosa appeared carrying 2 water bags, which she was clearly taking somewhere for filling. She smiled when she saw Thomas and altered her path to approach him. "You slept well?" she asked. "Well enough," Thomas said, which was not entirely true but seemed polite. "Your people are very hospitable." "We take care of guests," Rosa said. "It is our way." "Also, Nasha told everyone of your offer to provide shelter if needed. You have made a strong impression." Before Thomas could respond, a commotion at the edge of camp drew everyone's attention. 2 young men were riding in fast, their horses lathered with sweat. They leaped down and immediately went to Nasha, speaking urgently in Apache. Thomas saw the chief's expression darken and watched as he barked orders that sent people scrambling. Rosa's face had gone pale. "What is happening?" Thomas asked. "Soldiers," Rosa said, her voice tight. "A patrol from Fort Lowell is coming this direction. The scouts say they are perhaps 2 hours away." Thomas felt his stomach drop. "Will they find this camp?" "Probably," Rosa said. "We are not hidden well enough if they are searching seriously." Nasha is deciding if we should move or wait and speak with them. The camp was rapidly transforming from peaceful mourning to controlled urgency. Women began gathering essential supplies while men checked weapons and horses. Thomas saw Rosa's father and the other men having an intense discussion with Nasha. Rosa clutched her water bags tightly, clearly torn between her task and the crisis. "Rosa," Thomas said, an idea forming. "Would some of your people come to my ranch? Not everyone, but the most vulnerable. Children, elders, anyone who might be taken to the reservation regardless of what the soldiers find here. They could shelter at my place until the patrol moves on." Rosa's eyes widened. "You would truly do this?" "I made an offer last night," Thomas said firmly. "I meant it. Bring whoever needs shelter most, and I will make sure they are safe." Rosa dropped the water bags and ran toward where the men were conferring. Thomas followed, arriving in time to hear her rapidly explaining his offer in a mix of English and Apache. Nasha looked at Thomas with an expression of surprise and calculation. "You understand you could be arrested for harboring Apache away from the reservation?" the chief asked. "I understand," Thomas said, "but the soldiers do not patrol my ranch regularly. If your people stay hidden in my house and barns, there is no reason for the army to know they are there. It is not a perfect plan, but it is something." Nasha made a decision quickly, as a good leader must. "Rosa will go with you, and her mother, and the 3 youngest children whose parents were killed last winter. Also Desba, who is very old and would not survive the trip to San Carlos. The rest of us will remain and speak with the soldiers. We have broken no laws. We will tell them we are hunting and gathering in our traditional way, and perhaps they will leave us in peace." Thomas nodded, though he shared Rosa's obvious doubt that the soldiers would be so easily satisfied. The policy was to concentrate all Apache on reservations, whether they had committed any offense or not. People moved fast now with the efficiency of those who had survived, by being prepared to flee at a moment's notice. Rosa's mother gathered supplies while Rosa helped with the children, 3 small ones ranging from perhaps 4 to 8 years old. An ancient woman who must be Desba was helped onto a travois attached to a gentle horse. Thomas quickly saddled Copper and Dusty, and other horses were prepared for Rosa, her mother, and the children. "You know the way back to your ranch from here?" Rosa asked as she swung onto her horse, a child seated in front of her. "I remember enough," Thomas said, hoping that was true. "We need to go fast but carefully. Can everyone manage?" Rosa translated and received affirmative responses. Thomas looked at Nasha one more time. "Be careful. If things go badly, send word to my ranch. We will help however we can." "You are a true friend to the Apache, Thomas Everett," Nasha said formally. "This will be remembered." Then there was no more time for words. Thomas led their small group out of the camp at a fast trot, not quite a run but close. He navigated by instinct and memory, trying to retrace the route he and Rosa had taken the day before. Rosa rode beside him when the terrain allowed, behind him when it narrowed, always keeping the children secure and calm. They rode hard for nearly an hour before Thomas judged it safe to slow down and rest the horses. They were well away from the area where the soldiers would find the camp, and he felt reasonably confident they had not been spotted. The children were wide-eyed and quiet, clearly frightened but trying to be brave. Rosa's mother spoke to them softly in Apache, comforting words that seemed to ease their tension. "How much farther to your ranch?" Rosa asked, bringing her horse alongside Copper. "Maybe 2 more hours at a steady pace," Thomas estimated. "The horses need water before we push them harder." They had stopped near a small spring that Thomas remembered passing the day before, and he helped everyone dismount and led the horses to drink. The children stayed close to Rosa and her mother, and old Desba dozed in the travois, seemingly unconcerned about the dramatic change in her circumstances. "Will we be safe at the white man's house?" The oldest child asked Rosa in English, clearly wanting Thomas to understand the question. "Yes," Rosa said firmly, crouching down to the child's level. "Thomas is a good man. He will protect us." The child studied Thomas with solemn eyes. "You are not like the bad white men." Thomas felt his heart constrict at the implied experiences behind that question. He knelt as well, bringing himself to the child's height. "I will do everything I can to keep you safe. You have my word." The child considered this, then nodded slowly. "My name is Kai." "I am very glad to meet you, Kai," Thomas said seriously. "Would you like to ride on my horse with me for the next part of the journey? She is very gentle, and I think you would enjoy being up front where you can see everything." Kai's eyes lit up with cautious excitement, and he looked at Rosa for permission. She nodded encouragingly, and Kai came shyly to Thomas. They remounted with the new arrangement. Kai settled securely in front of Thomas on Copper's broad back. The boys' initial nervousness quickly transformed into delight as they set off again, and Thomas found himself answering endless questions about the horse, the land, and ranch life. The other 2 children, both girls, gradually lost their frightened expressions and began chattering among themselves. Rosa rode close and caught Thomas's eye, her expression warm with approval and something else he did not dare name. "You are good with children," she observed. "I had younger cousins back in Missouri," Thomas explained. "I always enjoyed their company, though I have not been around children in years." "You should have many of your own someday," Rosa's mother said from where she rode behind them. Her tone was pointed in a way that made Thomas wonder what matchmaking thoughts were running through her mind. They reached Thomas's ranch in the early afternoon, the simple buildings looking welcoming after the hard ride. Thomas helped everyone dismount and showed them into his house, which suddenly seemed very small with 8 people inside instead of his usual solitary presence. But everyone was gracious about the cramped quarters, and Rosa's mother immediately began organizing sleeping arrangements with the practical efficiency of a woman accustomed to making do with whatever was available. "The children can sleep in the bedroom," Rosa said. "Mother and I will take the main room, and Desba should have comfort so she can have the bed also. You and I can sleep in the barn, Thomas. It will be warmer than outside and there is hay for padding." Thomas wanted to protest that Rosa should have better accommodations, but he understood the logic of her plan. The most vulnerable needed the most protection, and his house would be warmer and more secure than the barn. "That makes sense," he agreed. "I will bring blankets and we can make it comfortable enough." The afternoon was spent settling everyone in and making sure there were adequate supplies. Thomas had laid in stores for himself alone, not for 8 people, and he mentally calculated how long his food would last. Perhaps a week if they were careful. He would need to ride to Tucson soon for more, though that would mean leaving the group alone for a day, and that made him nervous. Rosa seemed to sense his thoughts. "We are used to making food stretch," she said quietly as they worked together to prepare an early supper. "And my mother and I can hunt or gather if needed. We will not be a burden longer than necessary." "You are not a burden," Thomas said firmly. "Any of you. I am glad I can help." Rosa paused in slicing bread to look at him directly. "Why are you doing this, Thomas? The truth, not just the polite answer." Thomas set down the pot he was holding and met her eyes. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because I have been given much in my life, even with the losses I have suffered, and it is right to share what I have. And because knowing you has made me want to be a better man than I was." Rosa's breath caught audibly. "Thomas." "I know it has only been a few days," Thomas continued, the words tumbling out now that he had started. "I know this is sudden and probably foolish, but you have affected me profoundly, Rosa. You are brave and kind and strong, and being near you makes me feel less alone than I have in years. I do not know what that means or what can come of it, but I needed you to know." Rosa set down her knife and moved closer until they stood face to face in the small kitchen. "I feel it too," she said softly. "This connection between us. I thought perhaps it was just gratitude on my part, but it is more than that. You make me want things I did not think were possible." "What things?" Thomas asked, barely breathing. "A life that is mine to choose," Rosa said. "A partner who sees me as an equal. A future that holds love instead of just survival. These are dangerous dreams for an Apache woman to have in these times." "They are the dreams everyone deserves," Thomas said. He raised his hand slowly, giving Rosa time to move away if she wished, and gently touched her cheek. "I do not know how we make this work, Rosa. Our peoples are at odds, your family would have concerns, my life is here and yours is with your band. But I want to try, if you will let me." Rosa covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her face. "I want to try also, even knowing how complicated and difficult it will be." They stood there in the fading afternoon light, the sounds of the children playing and the women talking in the next room creating a domestic backdrop that felt both strange and utterly right. Thomas wanted to kiss Rosa, felt the pull of it like gravity, but this did not seem like the right moment with so many people around and so much uncertainty hanging over them. Instead, he settled for squeezing her hand gently and saying, "Then we will figure it out together." Rosa smiled, her whole face transforming with the genuine joy of it. "Together," she agreed. They finished preparing the meal and called everyone to eat. The children had relaxed considerably and chattered excitedly about the ranch, the animals, the big bed they would get to share. Desba ate slowly, but with good appetite. And Rosa's mother watched the interactions around her table with shrewd, knowing eyes that kept landing on Thomas and Rosa with obvious approval. After supper, as the sun set and the temperature began to drop toward a more comfortable level, Thomas showed Rosa to the barn. He had prepared a space in the loft where hay had been piled and covered with blankets, creating two separate sleeping areas with enough distance between them to be proper but close enough for conversation. "It is not luxurious," Thomas said, "but it should be reasonably comfortable." "It is fine," Rosa assured him. She climbed the ladder to the loft and settled onto one of the piles of hay, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "I have slept in far worse places." Thomas climbed up after her and took his own designated spot. Copper and the other horses moved quietly in their stalls below, their presence a comforting sound in the darkness. Through the open loft door, stars were beginning to appear in the deepening sky. "What do you think is happening with your band?" Thomas asked quietly. "Do you think the soldiers will let them be?" "I hope so," Rosa said, but her voice held doubt. "Nasha is a skilled speaker and he will try to convince them we are no threat, but many soldiers do not care about talk. They have orders to bring all Apache to San Carlos, and orders are all that matter to them." "If things went badly, how would we know?" Thomas asked. "How would they send word? We have ways of leaving messages," Rosa said. "Markers on trails that only Apache would recognize. If it is safe to return, they will leave a sign at the place where you first found me near your fence. Someone will check there each day." "I can do that," Thomas offered. "I am out working the property every day anyway. It would not be unusual for me to ride that direction." Rosa smiled at him through the darkness. "You would do that. Check for messages, of course," Thomas said. "I want your people to be safe, Rosa, and I want you to be able to reunite with them when the danger has passed." There was a pause, then Rosa asked quietly, "And what happens then?" "When I return to my band and you return to your ranch alone." Thomas was silent for a moment, considering his answer. "I suppose that depends on what we both want. I would not ask you to leave your people permanently, Rosa. That would be wrong. But perhaps we could find a way to be together that honors both our lives." "What way?" Rosa asked, and Thomas heard the longing in her voice, the desire to believe such a thing was possible. "I do not know yet," Thomas admitted, "but people who care for each other find ways. Maybe you could stay here part of the time and with your band part of the time. Maybe I could learn to be welcome in your camp and spend time there. Maybe there is some arrangement we have not even thought of yet." "My people move with the seasons," Rosa said thoughtfully. "We are not always in the same place, but in winter we tend to stay in the protected valleys of these hills. That is not so far from your ranch. So in winter we could see each other more easily," Thomas said, feeling hope rise. "And in summer when your band travels, we would have less time together, but we would make the most of it." "It would not be easy," Rosa warned. "There would be people on both sides who disapproved. White settlers who think you are a traitor for loving an Apache woman. Apache who think I am betraying our ways by being with a white man." "Let them disapprove," Thomas said with more confidence than he felt. "We are not harming anyone. We are just trying to live our lives with love instead of hate. That should not be controversial, though I know it is." Rosa laughed softly. "You are an idealist, Thomas Everett." "Maybe," Thomas agreed. "But is that so bad?" "No," Rosa said warmly. "It is one of the things I admire about you." They talked late into the night, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their futures, fears about the present situation. Thomas learned that Rosa was 22 years old, just 2 years younger than himself. She had been trained as a healer from childhood, learning from her grandmother, who had been renowned for her knowledge of medicine plants. Rosa wanted to continue that tradition, to preserve the knowledge and help her people stay healthy in increasingly difficult circumstances. Thomas told her about growing up in Missouri, about his parents and their farm, about the devastation of losing them both so suddenly. He spoke of his former fiancée without bitterness, having come to understand that they simply wanted different things from life. He described his dreams for his ranch, modest ambitions to expand his herd and maybe one day build a larger house, have a family if he was fortunate enough to find the right partner. "And have you found her?" Rosa asked softly. "The right partner," Thomas's heart pounded as he answered. "I think I have, if she will have me." He heard Rosa's sharp intake of breath, then the sound of her moving through the hay. She appeared at his side, having crossed the distance he had carefully maintained for propriety's sake. In the darkness of the barn loft, lit only by starlight through the open door, Rosa leaned close and kissed him. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then Thomas wrapped his arms around Rosa and deepened the kiss, pouring into it all the loneliness and longing he had carried for so long. Rosa responded with equal passion, her hands gripping his shirt as though afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against Rosa's. "I am falling in love with you," he whispered. "I think I have been since the moment I saw you stumbling through the brush toward my ranch." "Love," Rosa repeated as though testing the weight of the word. "Yes, that is what this feels like. I am falling in love with you too, Thomas." They held each other in the darkness, neither speaking, just absorbing the profound shift that had occurred between them. Love seemed both too simple and too complicated a word for what Thomas felt. It was attraction, certainly, powerful physical desire that made him want to kiss Rosa again, and never stop. But it was also deeper than that, a recognition of kindred spirits, a meeting of minds and hearts that transcended the superficial differences of their backgrounds. "We should sleep," Rosa finally said, though she made no move to return to her own blankets. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." "Stay here," Thomas said. "I will not dishonor you, I swear it, but I want to hold you tonight. Let me just hold you." Rosa relaxed against him in answer, and Thomas arranged the blankets around them both. They lay together in the hay, Rosa's back pressed against Thomas's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. It was chaste enough to preserve propriety, but intimate enough to feel profound. Thomas breathed in the scent of her hair, felt the rise and fall of her breathing, and thought he had never known such contentment. "Good night, Thomas," Rosa whispered. "Good night, love," Thomas replied, and felt her shiver happily at the endearment. They fell asleep that way, two people from different worlds finding unexpected peace in each other's arms while danger lurked somewhere beyond the sanctuary of the ranch. Thomas woke to sunlight streaming through the loft door, and the immediate awareness that Rosa was no longer beside him. He sat up quickly, momentarily disoriented, then heard her voice from below speaking softly to the horses. Relief flooded through him, and he climbed down the ladder to find her feeding hay to Copper. "You are awake," Rosa said with a smile that made Thomas's heart skip. "I woke early and did not want to disturb you. You looked peaceful." "I was peaceful," Thomas said, moving close to her. "Last night was perfect," Rosa finished. "It was perfect." Thomas kissed her good morning, a brief sweet touch that promised more to come. Then the sound of the children calling from the house reminded them both that they were not alone and had responsibilities beyond their own happiness. The day fell into a domestic routine that felt strange and wonderful to Thomas. Rosa's mother prepared breakfast while Rosa helped the children dress. Thomas tended the animals and checked on his cattle, finding everything in order. Old Desba sat in the sun outside the house, her weathered face turned toward the warmth like a flower seeking light. As Thomas had promised Rosa, he saddled Copper after breakfast and rode out toward the place where he had first found her. The fence line looked undisturbed, but Thomas dismounted and examined the area carefully as Rosa had instructed. For several minutes he saw nothing, then noticed a small pile of stones arranged in a specific pattern near a mesquite bush. Thomas's heart raced as he approached the stones. They had not been there the day before, he was certain. This must be the message Rosa's people had left. But what did it mean? Rosa had not explained the code, assuming she would be the one checking for signs. He carefully noted the position and arrangement of the stones, then rode back to the ranch quickly. Rosa was outside helping the children explore the area near the barn when Thomas returned, and he called her over with an urgent gesture. "There are stones arranged near where I found you," Thomas said quietly. "I think they are a message, but I do not know how to read it." Rosa's eyes widened. "Show me where exactly they were placed." Thomas described the location and Rosa nodded slowly. "That is the place. The pattern of stones tells the message. Did they form a line, a circle, a triangle?" "3 stones in a line pointing west," Thomas said, "with 1 stone placed north of the center stone." Rosa's face lit up with relief. "That means they are safe and moving to their winter camp in the western valleys. The single stone to the north means they want us to stay where we are for now, that it is not yet safe to travel." "So the soldiers did not arrest them," Thomas said, feeling his own relief wash through him. "It appears not," Rosa confirmed, "though I wish I knew details." "But this is good news, Thomas. Very good news." They told the others, and the atmosphere in the house improved dramatically. Rosa's mother began singing as she worked, the children played more freely, and even Desba seemed more animated. Thomas realized how much stress everyone had been carrying, the fear of what might have happened to their family and friends. The days that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. Thomas worked his ranch with help from Rosa and even the children when they could manage simple tasks. Rosa's mother proved to be an excellent cook who could make his limited supplies stretch impressively. In the evenings they would gather together, and Rosa would tell stories or her mother would sing traditional songs that made the children drowsy and content. And at night, Thomas and Rosa would retreat to the barn loft where they could be alone. They talked endlessly, learning everything about each other, sharing kisses that grew more passionate as their love deepened. Thomas wanted more, his body aching with desire for Rosa, but he refused to dishonor her. If they were to build a life together, it would be founded on respect as much as love. "I want to marry you," Thomas said one night as they lay together under the stars visible through the loft door. "Properly, with your family's blessing and whatever traditions are important to your people. I want you to be my wife, Rosa." Rosa turned in his arms to look at him, her eyes shining. "You are certain? This will not be easy, Thomas. People will judge us harshly." "I have never been more certain of anything," Thomas said. "I love you, Rosa. I want to build a life with you, face whatever challenges come together. Say yes. Please say yes." "Yes," Rosa said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I want to marry you. I want to be your wife." Thomas kissed her deeply, sealing their promise to each other. They would face opposition and difficulty, he knew. But they would face it together, and that made all the difference. The next morning, Thomas rode out to check the stone markers again. This time he found them rearranged into a circle with a line of 3 stones leading southeast. When he described this to Rosa, she translated the meaning. "It is safe to return," she said. "My people have reached the winter camp and want us to come. The soldiers have moved on." Thomas felt both relief and regret. Relief that Rosa's people were safe, regret that their time in this domestic bubble was ending. But he reminded himself that this was not goodbye, just a transition to the next phase. "When do you want to leave?" Thomas asked. "Tomorrow morning," Rosa said. "It is a day's ride to the winter camp from here. We should go soon before the weather changes or new trouble arrives." That night, Thomas and Rosa told everyone the plan. The children were excited to return to their people, and Rosa's mother clearly missed her husband and the rest of the band. Only Desba seemed unconcerned either way, content wherever she found herself. "You will come with us?" Rosa's mother asked Thomas. "To the winter camp. Rosa says you wish to marry my daughter." "If you will have me," Thomas said respectfully. "I know I am not Apache. I know our peoples have been enemies. But I love Rosa with all my heart, and I will spend my life trying to make her happy." Rosa's mother studied him with those shrewd, knowing eyes. Then she smiled. "I knew from the first day that you were meant for my daughter. The spirits do not make mistakes. You will be a good husband. Welcome to our family, Thomas Everett." Thomas felt emotion well up in his chest and had to blink hard against sudden tears. To be welcomed so generously, despite everything, felt like an unearned gift. "Thank you," he managed. "I am honored." The next morning they prepared to leave early. Thomas made arrangements for his ranch, leaving extra feed out for the cattle and horses he would not be taking. He planned to return in a few days, but he wanted to make sure his animals were cared for regardless. The journey to the winter camp was long but uneventful. The children rode doubled up with adults. Desba dozed in her travois, and Rosa rode beside Thomas, their horses close enough that their legs occasionally brushed. They talked of their future, making plans for how they would divide their time between the ranch and the Apache camp. It would not be easy or conventional, but it would be theirs. As they crested a final rise and looked down into a sheltered valley, Thomas saw the winter camp spread below. It was larger than the temporary camp he had visited before, with more permanent structures and clear evidence of longer habitation. Smoke rose from many fires, and people moved about in the business of daily life. "Home," Rosa said softly. "That is home." They descended into the valley and were quickly surrounded by people welcoming back the travelers. Rosa's father swept his wife into his arms, then embraced Rosa fiercely. Nasha came forward to greet Thomas, clasping his arm in a gesture of respect and friendship. "You kept them safe," the chief said. "We are grateful. The soldiers came as our scouts warned, but we convinced them we were just hunters passing through the area. They seemed satisfied and left, but it was dangerous for a few days. Your offer of shelter may have saved lives." "I am glad I could help," Thomas said honestly. Word spread quickly that Thomas had come not just as a friend, but as Rosa's intended husband. People gathered with open curiosity, and Thomas felt their assessing stares. But he stood straight and met their eyes with honest respect, neither aggressive nor overly submissive. He was here as Rosa's choice, as someone who loved her and wanted to join his life with hers. That gave him the right to be here, and he would claim that right with dignity. That evening, a council was called. Thomas sat beside Rosa with her parents flanking them while Nasha and the other elders formed a circle. The traditional discussions began, conducted primarily in Apache, though Rosa translated the important parts for Thomas. He learned there were concerns about a white man marrying into the band, practical questions about where they would live and how such a marriage would work. But there was also recognition that Thomas had proven himself a friend through his actions, and that Rosa was an adult woman entitled to choose her own husband. The discussion lasted hours, sometimes heated but never hostile. Thomas answered questions when they were directed at him, always honestly and with respect for the process. He acknowledged the valid concerns while maintaining that his love for Rosa was genuine and his commitment to honoring her people was absolute. Finally, as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, Nasha called for a decision. The vote among the elders was not unanimous, but it was definitive. Thomas would be welcome to marry Rosa and join the band as a member, though he would be expected to prove his worth through his actions over time. "That seems more than fair," Thomas said when Rosa translated the outcome. "I ask for nothing more than the chance to prove myself." Rosa's father stood and addressed Thomas directly. "You will marry my daughter in our traditional way. This is important. She is Apache, and your marriage should honor that." "I would be honored," Thomas said. "Please tell me what is required and I will do it." The wedding preparations began the next day. Thomas learned that Apache marriage customs were less formal than white ceremonies, but no less meaningful. There would be an exchange of gifts between the families, though Thomas had no family to participate in his behalf. Nasha solved this by declaring that the entire band would stand as Thomas's family, a gesture that moved Thomas deeply. For his gift, Thomas offered his finest horse, the gelding Dusty, along with supplies from his ranch including tools and blankets. Rosa's family gave Thomas a bow made by her father and beautiful beadwork created by her mother, items of deep personal and cultural significance. The exchange was conducted with ceremony and witnessed by the entire band. Then came the heart of the ceremony. Thomas and Rosa stood before the community as Nasha spoke blessings in Apache. Rosa translated quietly, explaining that the chief was asking the spirits to guide their marriage, to give them children and long life, to keep them safe through the troubles of the world. Other people came forward to offer their own blessings and advice, some in English but most in Apache, creating a rich tapestry of goodwill. Finally, Rosa's mother brought forward a blanket that she wrapped around both Thomas and Rosa's shoulders, binding them together. "You are now one," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Two people with one heart. Honor each other, love each other, and your marriage will be a blessing to all." Thomas looked down at Rosa, at this extraordinary woman who had stumbled into his life and changed everything. "I love you," he said, "for all my days." "I love you," Rosa replied, "for all of mine." They kissed while the band erupted in celebration around them, drums beginning to beat and voices raised in song. Food was brought forward, fermented drinks were passed, and the party that followed lasted well into the night. Thomas danced with Rosa, was taught the steps by patient people who laughed at his mistakes but cheered his efforts. He felt welcomed in a way he had not expected, his fears about being an outsider gradually dissolving in the warmth of genuine community acceptance. When the celebration finally wound down, Rosa led Thomas to a wickiup that had been prepared for them as their marriage lodge. Inside, blankets and furs had been piled to create a soft bed, and a small fire burned in the center pit, the smoke drifting out through the opening at the top of the structure. It was simple but beautiful, and entirely theirs. Thomas pulled Rosa close, finally allowing himself to fully express the desire he had kept in check for weeks. They came together with passion and tenderness, learning each other's bodies as they had learned each other's hearts. Rosa was bold and giving, Thomas reverent and careful of her pleasure. They made love through the night, sometimes urgently and sometimes slowly, always with the profound connection that came from genuine love rather than mere lust. After, as they lay tangled together under the furs, Rosa traced patterns on Thomas's chest. "I am happy," she said simply. "Happier than I thought possible in these difficult times." "So am I," Thomas said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher." "Thank you for being the man I did not know I was looking for," Rosa replied. They dozed fitfully, waking to make love again as the sky outside began to lighten toward dawn. Thomas could not seem to get enough of his wife, could barely believe that she was truly his. Every touch felt like a revelation, every sigh of pleasure she made a victory. But with morning came responsibility. They could not spend their entire lives in the marriage lodge, though Thomas was tempted to suggest exactly that. There were expectations now that they were married, ways they needed to contribute to the band and begin building their life together. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Thomas began learning the rhythms of Apache life, participating in hunts and helping with construction projects around the camp. The men gradually accepted him as he proved willing to work hard and learn their ways without complaint. The women welcomed him more easily, seeing how happy he made Rosa and appreciating his obvious efforts to fit in. Rosa, meanwhile, returned to her work as a healer, and Thomas often accompanied her when she gathered herbs in the hills. They were never quite alone, as people were cautious about the continuing threat of soldiers or hostile settlers, but they found moments of privacy where they could talk and kiss, and simply be together. A week after the wedding, Thomas reluctantly told Rosa he needed to return to his ranch for at least a few days. He had animals to care for and fences to check, and he wanted to bring back supplies that would be useful for the band. "I will come with you," Rosa said immediately. "I am your wife now. Where you go, I go." They rode out together the next morning, and Thomas felt his heart swell with contentment as they traveled. Having Rosa beside him transformed the lonely ride he had made countless times before into something joyful. They talked and laughed, stopped to make love under the wide Arizona sky, and generally acted like the newlyweds they were. The ranch looked exactly as Thomas had left it, which was both comforting and odd. So much had changed in his life, it seemed strange that the physical world had not shifted to reflect it. But his cattle were fine, the horses were healthy, and the house stood waiting for his return. "This is your home," Rosa said as she dismounted. "Show me everything." Thomas gave her a tour, pointing out all the improvements he had made over 3 years, explaining his plans for future expansion. Rosa listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions and offering suggestions. They spent the afternoon working side by side, mending fence and moving cattle to better grazing, falling into an easy partnership that felt natural. That night, they made love in Thomas's bed, and it felt like a claiming of this space as truly theirs. Rosa belonged here as much as she belonged in the Apache camp, and Thomas felt the rightness of their decision to split their time between both worlds. They spent 3 days at the ranch, during which Thomas made the trip into Tucson for supplies. Rosa stayed hidden at the ranch, both of them cautious about potential trouble if white settlers learned about their marriage. Thomas felt the injustice of having to hide his wife, but he swallowed his anger and did what was necessary to keep Rosa safe. In Tucson, he bought flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples, along with ammunition and some bolts of cloth Rosa had requested. The merchant who sold him the goods was curious about the extra supplies, and Thomas vaguely mentioned having hired help at the ranch. It was not quite a lie, though it felt dishonest. But what choice did he have? The truth would likely cause problems for both of them. The ride back to the ranch was uneventful, but as Thomas approached, he saw smoke rising and his heart lurched with fear. He urged Copper faster, terrified that something had happened while he was gone, that Rosa was in danger or hurt or worse. He burst into the yard to find Rosa calmly tending a cooking fire, a pot of stew bubbling over the flames. She looked up at his panicked arrival with surprise. "Thomas." "What is wrong?" "I saw the smoke and thought something had happened," Thomas said, feeling foolish as relief made him almost dizzy. Rosa's expression softened. "I am sorry, I did not think how it would look. I was making supper. Everything is fine." Thomas dismounted and pulled Rosa into his arms, holding her tight. "I was so scared," he admitted. "The thought of losing you." "You will not lose me," Rosa said firmly. "I am yours, Thomas, for always." They unloaded the supplies and Thomas showed Rosa what he had bought. She was particularly pleased with the cloth, explaining that she wanted to make new dresses for herself and shirts for Thomas. Things they could wear in both the Apache camp and at the ranch. The next morning they loaded pack horses with supplies to take back to the winter camp, and Thomas took a last look around his ranch. "I will come back in 2 weeks," he told Rosa. "Is that schedule manageable for you?" "Yes," Rosa said. 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there. It is a good balance." They rode back to the winter camp and were welcomed warmly. Thomas presented the supplies to Nasha as a contribution to the band, and the chief accepted them with grateful dignity. Life in the camp continued its rhythms, and Thomas found himself settling into a dual existence that felt surprisingly natural. Winter deepened, bringing colder temperatures and occasional snow to the Arizona high country. The band stayed close to the winter camp, and Thomas spent most of his time there, making only brief trips to check on his ranch. Rosa was often busy with healing work, as winter brought respiratory illnesses and injuries from harsh weather. Thomas helped where he could, learning about her herbal remedies and proving adept at setting broken bones under her instruction. One night as they lay together in their wickiup, Rosa took Thomas's hand and placed it on her belly. "I think I am pregnant," she said quietly. "It is early still, but I know the signs." Thomas felt joy explode through his chest. "A child, we are going to have a child." "Yes," Rosa said, smiling at his obvious delight. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Thomas said, kissing her deeply. "You are giving me everything I never knew I wanted. A wife, a family, a place to belong. You are my whole world, Rosa." "And you are mine," she replied, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into early spring. Rosa continued her healing work as long as she felt able, then gradually stepped back as her belly grew. Thomas became almost comically protective, worrying about every little thing until Rosa finally told him to stop, or she would make him sleep in a different wickiup. The baby came in late spring, a healthy boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's strong features. They named him Kai Thomas, honoring the Apache boy who had been one of the children they sheltered and giving him his father's name as a middle designation. The birth was attended by Rosa's mother and the other women of the band, and when Thomas was finally allowed to hold his son, he wept openly with joy and wonder. "You are perfect," he whispered to the tiny infant, "and I promise I will always protect you and your mother. You will grow up knowing love, not hate, peace, not war. That is my vow to you." As Kai grew from infant to toddler, Thomas and Rosa settled into their blended life. They spent summers mostly at the ranch where it was easier for Rosa to manage with a small child, and winters with the band where there was more community support. Kai learned both English and Apache, absorbed the traditions and stories of both cultures, and was loved fiercely by everyone who knew him. 2 years after Kai's birth, Rosa gave birth to a daughter they named Maya Rose. She had her father's brown hair but her mother's elegant features, and from the beginning she was a force of nature, demanding attention and giving love with equal intensity. The years passed with surprising peace. The army patrols became less frequent as attention shifted to conflicts in other regions. Thomas's ranch prospered, allowing him to provide well for his growing family. Rosa's work as a healer made her invaluable to both the Apache band and eventually to some of the white settlers in the area, who learned to overcome their prejudices when their children were sick and needed help. There were challenges, certainly. Some white settlers refused to associate with Thomas once they learned about his Apache wife. Some Apache, particularly younger warriors, viewed Thomas with suspicion as a representative of the people who had stolen their land. But Thomas and Rosa faced these difficulties together, their love and commitment never wavering on their 10th wedding anniversary. Thomas and Rosa stood on a ridge overlooking both his ranch and the distant valley, where the Apache winter camp was located. Their children played nearby, Kai now a confident boy of 9 and Maya a spirited girl of 7. Rosa was pregnant again, and they were happy to be expanding their family further. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked, pulling Rosa close. "Choosing this complicated life with me?" "Never," Rosa said firmly. "You are my heart, Thomas. You always have been, from the moment I stumbled onto your ranch. The spirits knew what they were doing when they brought us together." "I love you," Thomas said, the words as fresh and true as the day he first spoke them. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Rosa replied, kissing him softly, "in this life and whatever comes after." They stood together watching the sunset paint the Arizona landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Two people from different worlds who had found a way to build something beautiful together. It had not been easy and it would never be simple, but it was real and it was theirs. And as their children's laughter rang out across the ridge and Rosa's hand found Thomas's, he knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man alive. Their story became legend in the region, told by both Apache and settlers as an example of how love could bridge even the widest divides. Thomas and Rosa lived long lives surrounded by children, grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren, who carried the best of both their heritages forward into a changing world. When Thomas finally passed away at the age of 76, with Rosa holding his hand and their family surrounding them, his last words were simple and perfect. It was a beautiful life. Rosa followed him just 6 months later, unable or unwilling to be parted from her beloved husband for long. They were buried together on the ridge, where they had stood so many times watching the sunset, with markers in both English and Apache, recognizing their contributions to peace and understanding between peoples. Their children and grandchildren continued the legacy, maintaining both the ranch and the connections to the Apache band, proving that the bridge Thomas and Rosa had built was strong enough to last for generations. The world around them continued to change, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse, but the family they had created remained a testament to the power of love to overcome fear, prejudice, and division. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the Arizona high country and the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, people would swear they could see two figures standing on the ridge, hand in hand, watching over the land and the family they had built together. Some called it imagination or wishful thinking, but those who knew the story of Thomas and Rosa understood it was something more. It was proof that true love never really dies, but instead transforms into something eternal, a light that continues to shine long after the lovers themselves have passed from the physical world into legend. The ranch still stood, passed down through Thomas and Rosa's descendants, now run by their great-great-grandson who bore Thomas's name and had inherited Rosa's healing gifts. The Apache band had long since been forced onto reservations, but they maintained their traditions and their stories, and among those stories, the tale of Rosa and Thomas held a place of honor. In the modern world of the 21st century, a young woman who was descended from both Thomas and Rosa stood on that same ridge where her ancestors had watched so many sunsets. She was a doctor now, working at a clinic that served both the reservation and the surrounding communities, continuing Rosa's healing legacy in a new form. She brought her own children to the ridge sometimes and told them the story of their ancestors, the lonely rancher and the lost Apache woman who had found each other against all odds. "Love is the strongest force in the universe," she would tell her children. "Stronger than hate, stronger than fear, stronger even than death. Your great-great-great-grandparents proved that, and their love lives on in you, in me, in everyone who chooses connection over division. Never forget that. Never forget where you come from, or the courage it took for them to build this family." And the children would listen, wide-eyed, and the story would continue, passed down to another generation, forever celebrating the love between a lonely rancher and an Apache healer who had stumbled into his life and changed it forever. The end of Thomas and Rosa's mortal story was just the beginning of their legacy, a legacy of love that transcended culture, race, and time itself, proving that some bonds are truly eternal. Their lives had been a testament to courage, to choosing love over fear, to building bridges instead of walls. And in a world that often forgot such lessons, their story remained a beacon of hope and inspiration for all who heard it. The ranch stood. The stories continued. And love endured, as it always has and always will, for those brave enough to embrace it.